So I painted the hair and mustache just so that I wouldn't have to do a lot of dark painting after I've done the face, because if I get dark onto the face, it's a heck of a hard thing to do to remove if there's blushing on there. I might take away some of the blushing. I also sculpted Freddie's hands, one holding the microphone and one with the arm raised in the fist in that iconic pose with the yellow jacket. They were blushed and painted, and you can see that they have veining in the back of them, and these were put onto the original matte hands. I cut the hands off and just retained the wrist element so that they would be able to be screwed back into the arm.
My pastels of choice are pan pastels. They come in 6 packs and 8 packs. There's a portrait set. I have, let's see, 4, 5, I have 20. I have at least 20 different colors of pan pastels. Some from the portrait set, some other earth tone sets, and that type. These are ones that I don't use, but this is what they look like. And they are velvety, highly pigmented, ultra soft pastels, and they're just wonderful. And I use most of the times I use elf brushes. I get these, you can get them in Walmart. These are, oops, upside down, elf brushes, all different types that they have. Sometimes they have them available, sometimes there's none on the pins in the store, but this is what I use. And these are so much better than paint brushes. These just put it on like makeup. And I use this one in particular. I marked it as my blender, so I don't really have color on it. I use this to blend in. These are especially good for working on vinyl. I found by testing it out, I can work with it on polymer clay. Normally you can use Genesis oil colors, but that's another heat set type of a situation. And you can use acrylics, use a staining technique, very light washes of acrylic, and you just keep staining it in. But since pan pastels came on the market, they've been pretty much a game changer, and they're just absolutely wonderful for doing any kind of repainting. I mean, it's not really painting, but I will come in later with my acrylics and do all the finishing touches, do the eyes and things like that with acrylics. But for the basic body blushing and stuff like that, these just can't be beat. Now, pan pastels unfortunately does not have a really good array of flesh tones, even in the portrait pack. So what I found were these Maries pastels. I got these on Amazon as well. I think there's a repaint artist called Lisa Ramsamy, and she is the one that I think she's the one that mentioned these, or maybe it was Sam from Halo Repaints. I don't know. Somebody mentioned these, but these have an amazing array of colors. And they have a nice, very nice flesh tone array, and blushing tones, things that you can mix in. And what I do is I just take an X-Acto knife, and I get these little containers, and I shave off those pastels in here to use. Now, they are not as smooth, they're not as soft, but they certainly give you the colors you need, which is important sometimes. My acrylics of choice are Liquitex Soft Body and Golden Fluid. Both very, very pigment rich and soft, so they're easy to work with. And as a medium, I mix in Liquitex airbrush medium to give them a good flow, even though I'm not using them in an airbrush, and water. So as I'm working along, if you get errors, I have a few Hemostats, which are, you can get these pretty cheaply on Amazon as well. And I'll go take these are magic erasers I get on eBay. Magic erasers are really expensive, the Mr. Clean brand, but if you get them on eBay, you can get 200 pack for like next to nothing. So I take that and I pull off a tiny little piece and I roll it in a ball. I don't know if you can see that. And I put it in the Hemostat so that it's pretty tightly balled up. And what you can do then is you can use this to erase back some mistakes, or if you put blush on too heavily, you can kind of make it go back. And this could, because this is a very, very light heat, what do you call it, abrasive, sorry. And so you can bring things back to a paler tone if you go too far. You see how far that went down. Also, I keep on hand these pencil erasers. These are very coarse, and you can sharpen that to a good tip, and you can get into little areas to get almost all the pastel and color off. And you see that thing that was there over on this side is completely gone. That was the one that was there. There was one here. It's completely gone. So those are two very good tools. These erasers that I've been using are, they're Staedtler Mars plastic erasers. 52855 is the number on them. And you can get a pen holder for it. And again, I just sharpen that in a pencil sharpener to get a point on it. But it is very, very, very soft. I don't know if you can see that. It's very, very soft. But it's good for getting into tiny little places, and you won't need to abrade it. It's not very abrasive, but it will remove the pastel. Now finally, when you get to the point where you like what you have and you're not done with it, but you want to not ruin what you already have, I keep these makeup sponges on hand, and this one's been used, so it's a little stiff. Here's a new one, and I use Liquitex Matte Medium matte varnish, and pour a little out on a plate. And what I'll do is just you can either take the fat end, the thin end, whichever you want to do, and get it good and, covered, but pounce off as much as you possibly can. I don't know if you can see that. Pounce off as much as you possibly can so there's not a lot there. And then go onto your area that you just pasteled and do that. Get it on there, and then with the drier end, go back and pounce it until it's matte. If matte medium is not really, at least the Liquitex is not really matte, it leaves a sheen, so I don't want that to happen. So what you do is, let me see if I can put this on an angle. When you put it on there, it's kind of wet. Then when you use the dry end on it and keep pouncing it until it's dry, don't keep pouncing it until you don't see any wet anymore. And it's a very nice matte finish. That's how I use matte varnish.
Face-up is a term for taking a blank resin doll, like a ball-jointed doll or BJD as they're called, and you're starting with nothing, so you're putting a face onto it. That's why it's called a face-up. I use the baked disc of clay. That's the same clay as the head, and I test out the pastels on that before I proceed to touch the head, so there's no surprises. Repainting was a term coined by repainting from a factory doll. In other words, a tonneau doll would come with a face already painted on it from the factory. That would be removed completely by acetone, and then would be quote-unquote repainted using paints and pastels and pencils and what have you. So that's the difference between repainting and a face-up. So in this case, on Freddie, we are doing a face-up because I created the head and it was blank.
After sealing this with the Liquitex matte varnish, I've come back and I've done a little bit more blushing just to make it a little more intense. Even though it looks very intense, it might look very intense on camera right now, but by the time you put in all the dark elements, the eyebrows, the eyes, and everything, all of that intensity goes back into the background, because right now you're looking at a blank face with just blush on it, so it seems to stand out. Now, some of the other tools that I use are these. I got these from a company. I'll try to remember to put the links in the description, but these are mini Q-tips, kind of, and it's just kind of like a fuzzy plastic thing at the end. And the company is Morezmore, Morezmore, Morezmore on eBay, and they have a store there, and they have all kinds of wonderful things for making dolls and so forth. But these are very, very helpful when you want to get into tight spaces. So what I did is I used this now, and I went inside his lip here next to his teeth and made it a little bit darker. I went in in here and in his eyes. Now, one tip when you're doing flesh tones, the human body is basically an orange tone, as you can see on the camera. It's got, it's got lights in it, it's got blues in it, it's got yellows in it, but it's mostly overall an orange tone. So on the color wheel, the complement to orange, or the opposite of orange, is blue. So when you want to do shadows and you want them to show up better, you'll add blue into your flesh tone. So I had that blush color, and what I do in the pan pastels, there's this, I don't know the name of the color, but it's a kind of a dusky navy blue. So I mixed that in, and what I did is I went in like under the bags, under the eyes, and in here, and any place that needs a good shadow, you want to use the complementary mixed into your flesh tone or your blush, so that it has a bluish tone, and that will emphasize the contrast of flesh and dark. Always remember that, even when you're painting, when you're doing anything. You can't have light without dark, you can't have dark without light, and you can't have shadow without complementary tones of the color that you're painting. If you want to do an apple, the complementary tone, and a red apple, the complementary tone would be a greenish shadow into the browns or whatever you use for the shadow, and so on and so forth. Learn your colors, learn your color wheels. Very, very helpful. Okay, so now I'm going to start putting some highlights into areas. One thing about pastels, the lighter pastels, once you seal them, they nearly always almost disappear. So you have to put them on a bit heavy, and you probably have to reapply quite often between sealers to have them show up. The blushing, the darker colors, they kind of stay true to what you're looking at. You do lose it a little bit when you seal. But the whites and the lights, oh my goodness, they just disappear. So, here I go. and I'm going to put a little bit of red around those white eyeballs because they're just too stark and nobody's eyeballs are completely white. So I'm going to go in there and touch up around them. And so the highlights kind of went away, so I'm going to use a little bit of watered down white to bring back some of the highlights in some of the areas in the acrylic paints. For the other colors, I keep this nearby to make sure that I'm getting what I want. Now on camera, you might be even. Sorry, I can't talk. You might not be seeing much of anything because these colors are so subtle. Like in the sculpting, when you get to a certain point, the movements and the changes are so subtle that they're very, very hard to see on camera. And I can't seem to get my webcam to get any closer than this without being in the way. So sorry about that, but follow along. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is because Q-tips are just so enormous, what I do is I take a bunch of toothpicks and I use a cotton ball and I just pull off tiny little wads and make small Q-tips out of them so I can get into little spots. Very thin paint allows you to layer it without any hard edges, and by just brushing over areas as it dries, there's very little paint on the brush, it builds up and becomes a little bit more opaque, and this allows you to feather the edges. I took a little bit of black pastel and went into the corners of his eyes and smudged it out a bit because he always looks like he has a little more makeup than just a simple eyeliner, and that gave him a little more depth in the eyes. What I'm going to do now is put little highlights in his eyes, and those bring the eyes to life, and I'll be back. There's no gloss on that eye at all, but it just looks like the eyeball is sparkling. So what I have left to do on Freddie is painting the hair and giving it some highlights and lowlights. But as for the face, I think I'm pretty much done.
I was blessed to get the opportunity to do this sculpt of Freddie Mercury because it was a commission. It was commissioned by my goddaughter / cousin's husband, Chris. He's been a lifelong fan of Freddie Mercury, so much so that his son's middle name is Mercury. I hope this will become a piece which will be passed down through their family for decades to come. Thank you, Chris.